Skynet's most famous killer was never built to kill. It was built to fool a father into hugging it back, a friend into trusting it, a resistance into dying beside something wearing a human's face. Decades of newer models followed, and somehow none of them ever managed to beat that first disguise, T-800. The most famous killing machine in movie history is only remembered for one thing it did badly: killing. Everyone points to the T-800 as Skynet's ultimate weapon, the gold standard of a machine built to end human beings. But go back and watch what actually earns it a spot in the culture forever, and it's not the kill count. It's the moment it stops being a weapon and starts being something closer to a person. Cyberdyne Systems Model 101 shows up in 1984, sent back from 2029 to erase Sarah Connor before her son ever matters. The chassis underneath is a hyperalloy combat endoskeleton, essentially unkillable, wrapped in living tissue grown over the metal so it can walk into a crowd and disappear. Not brute strength, camouflage, a machine engineered to pass as your neighbor, your boyfriend, your dad. By 1991, the same platform gets reprogrammed as Sarah's protector, and something strange happens. That flat, unreadable human face, terrifying in the first film, is heartbreaking in the second. Same model, same endoskeleton, opposite mission, identical disguise. It returns in Salvation in Genesis, and by Dark Fate it's aged for decades under a fake name, Carl, running a curtain business and raising a family like some kind of retired hitman who found Jesus. Skynet loved this design so much it mass-produced it as the standard infiltration unit for frontline war, matching the late 2020s timeline Kyle Reese describes. Nobody in the Resistance sends a soldier to fight one. They send someone who's learned to spot the face underneath the face, because that's the actual battlefield. Fans still argue over which Arnold counts as canon, T-800, T-850, or the one calling itself Pops, and that argument misses the point. The debate proves the design worked, but grafting flesh over metal was only Skynet's first attempt at wearing us. Its next infiltrator threw the skeleton away entirely, and built something the machines would never manage to top. T-1000. A shape-shifting assassin made of liquid metal walks through prison bars, reforms from a shotgun blast, and pretends to be your mother. That's not a movie pitch. That's Tuesday for Skynet's second infiltrator, and it never needed to try harder than that ever again. Robert Patrick's T-1000 shows up in Terminator 2, Judgment Day in 1991, one model after the T-800, and the ceiling gets hit immediately. The T-800 wears a human face like a costume. The T-1000 doesn't wear anything. It is made entirely of mimetic polyalloy, a liquid metal that becomes whatever it touches: a cop, a floor tile, a set of car keys, a knife growing straight out of its own arm. There's no skeleton hiding under that surface, no metal chassis waiting to be exposed. Shoot it, and it splashes apart, then crawls back together like nothing happened. Freeze it, shatter it into 1,000 pieces, and it just melts and reforms on the floor. The only thing that actually kills it is molten steel, hot enough to wreck the alloy at a structural level, permanently. Think about what that means for a father replaced by something that can literally become him, seamlessly, down to the voice and the walk, while his family has no way to know the difference until it's too late. Skynet doesn't hand these out like T-800 units. The Resistance treats a T-1000 sighting as a 5-alarm event because the machine is rare and brutally expensive to produce, saved exclusively for targets like John Connor. A different T-1000, played by Lee Byung-hun, resurfaces in Terminator Genesis in 2015, proving the design gets carried forward into an entirely new timeline decades later. Nobody upgrades it, they just reuse it. Nothing in later films ever tops this. No canon line says it outright, but the pattern is impossible to ignore once you see it laid out this clean. So, if perfect mimicry already existed, why did the next model bolt a metal skeleton back inside the liquid and hang a cannon off it? The answer says something uncomfortable about what Skynet actually wanted: TX. Skynet had a perfect infiltrator already running, and it decided that wasn't enough. That's the strange part. Nobody sits with. The T-1000 could become anyone, slip through bars, walk through fire, and reform on the other side without a scratch. So Skynet's next move should have been a better copy. Instead, it built something that looks, on paper, like a step backward. A metal endoskeleton, wrapped in mimetic polyalloy, first debuting in Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines in 2003, played by Kristanna Loken. Skynet called her the Terminatrix. Fans just called her Overkill with a face, because that endoskeleton is the tell. The T-1000 proved you didn't need one. Pure liquid metal could take a shotgun blast and shrug it off. The TX brings the skeleton back on purpose, and it's not for durability. It's a chassis to hang hardware on. A plasma cannon, projectile weapons, nanotech probes that hijack machines through direct interface. She doesn't just infiltrate a room full of people, she can climb into a car and drive it like a puppet, turning ordinary Skynet hardware into an extension of herself. That's the franchise's first true machine-to-machine network, running through a body shaped like a weapon platform wearing a disguise as an afterthought, which makes her less an upgrade to the shapeshifter and more a demotion of the whole idea. Skynet had the perfect impersonator and started bolting guns onto it. The TX isn't sent to quietly replace someone's father or lover. She's sent to erase John Connor and every lieutenant standing near him, a straight kill list with a commander's authority to route other machines onto it. Some fans call that the logical endpoint. Others call it a kitchen sink stapled to a liquid metal skin, all that firepower on screen and somehow still underused. But all these arguments assume Skynet's war machines started with sleek humanoid hunters. Rewind to the moment the machines first opened fire on people in the present day, and the hardware looks nothing like a person at all. T1. No mask, no face, no attempt to look human at all. That is the detail that makes the T1 matter more than its thin armor and stubby cannons suggest. This is Skynet's first real kill in the present day, and it does not bother pretending to be one of us. Inside the Cyber Research Systems building in 2003, these squat, tracked machines roll off their platforms with twin rotary cannons already spinning, and they cut down the very staff who built them. Production materials call them T1 battle drones, and that label tells you exactly what they are. Not infiltrators, not spies. Test platforms, built before Judgment Day even finishes arriving, designed to answer one question. Can this thing shoot straight and keep shooting? Sensor clusters instead of eyes, tracks instead of legs. A silhouette that looks like someone bolted a machine gun turret to a lawnmower and called it a soldier. Somewhere in that building is a person who clocked in that morning expecting a normal shift, and within seconds finds out the company's newest project treats employee and target as the same category. That is the human cost of Skynet's very first move. No negotiation, no disguise, just immediate erasure of anyone standing between it and control, which makes the T1 a strange kind of beginning. Every infiltrator that comes later, every synthetic face and stolen voice, is a refinement Skynet did not start with. It started blunt. It started with a machine that looked exactly like what it was, a gun on treads, because in that first chaotic hour, survival mattered more than subtlety. The human-like killers, it turns out, are the upgrade. The honest killer came first. Fans have connected the T1's tracked mobility and heavy gun focus to the armored hunter killers seen decades later in the war, and the visual DNA is hard to ignore. Nothing in the film confirms a direct lineage, but the pattern tracks. Strip away the armor plating and scale up the guns, and you are looking at the same design philosophy matured by 40 years of war. It may just be a repurposed industrial rig Skynet found lying around. Either way, the instinct behind it never really left. That first massacre happened on the ground, in a single building. But the war Kyle Reese remembered was fought under a sky that belonged entirely to the machines, and nothing on two legs ever ruled it. HK Aerial, no Terminator ever won the war. That job belonged to something that never bothered wearing a face. Look up in any future war scene from 1984 or 1991, and you find the real occupying force. Massive multi-engine aircraft grinding over dead cities, underside searchlights sweeping the rubble like the world's worst prison yard. These are HK Aerials, and they do not infiltrate anybody. They do not need to. The pitch is brutally simple. Fly low, flood the ruins with light, cut down anything that moves. Kyle Reese's own memories place these things patrolling the skies through the 2020s, right up through the grinding stalemate of 2029, which means for the better part of a decade this was the actual sound of losing the war, not a T-800 knocking on a door, engines overhead that never stopped. Production material and the wider mythology confirm HK Aerial as its own designation, one branch of a hunter-killer family that Skynet built specifically to never look human at all. Belly-mounted cannons, plasma fire-raking basements and stairwells, search patterns designed to leave nowhere to hide, because hiding was the only tactic humans had left. A father who used to tuck his kids into that same basement is now just a heat signature getting swept by a light that does not care whose family it belonged to. And that is the crack this whole video keeps widening. Every infiltrator gets a face, a name, a performance. The T1 already showed you Skynet's first instinct was blunt and mechanical, no mask required. The HK Aerial takes that same idea and puts it in permanent control of the sky. No disguise, no imitation, just total air superiority held for years by something that never once tried to pass as one of us. Fans argue endlessly over what is actually powering these things, plasma cannons or something closer to conventional ballistics, because the films never hand out a spec sheet. Engine count, armor thickness, payload, all fan reconstruction built on a few seconds of screen time. The mythology runs on imagery, not blueprints, and somehow that gap only makes the silhouette scarier. Total control of the sky still leaves one problem: the humans hiding in the rubble below. To grind them out, Skynet needed something that didn't fly over the ruins, but rolled straight through them, over whatever was left. HKI tank. The most famous shot in the entire franchise is not a Terminator's face. It's a tank tread rolling over a field of human skulls, and nobody's wearing a disguise when it happens. That image is the whole war in 4 seconds. No infiltration, no rubber, no pretending. Just a machine doing exactly what it looks like it's built to do. By 2029, Skynet doesn't need to be clever anymore. HK tanks are multi-tracked armored platforms with turret-mounted plasma cannons, built for one job: clear the trench, clear the city, clear the resistance position, repeat. Kyle Reese describes them working the surface alongside the aerial units, grinding forward while the sky stays denied above them. Together, they don't hunt individuals. They erase terrain. Expanded material draws a hard line between these things and the T-units. HK tanks get filed as autonomous hunter-killers, a separate combat classification entirely. Machines built for extermination rather than impersonation. No face, no voice, no father sent to smile at his own kid before the trigger pulls. Just plasma cannons and tracks wide enough to flatten a skeleton without even registering the weight change. And that's the detail that should bother you more than the guns. Somewhere under those treads is someone who used to be a person with a name. Someone a resistance fighter is still out there refusing to forget. The machines don't remember him. They don't have to. That's the whole design philosophy in one image. Nobody's ever nailed down exactly how independent these things are. The films never show a crew, never show a control room barking orders, which reads like full autonomy. But tie-in material keeps introducing Skynet Centrals pulling strings behind the scenes, and the two versions never fully agree. Is every HK tank its own cold little mind, or is Skynet driving all of them at once like a puppeteer with a few thousand hands? The canon just shrugs. What isn't up for debate is what the image is doing thematically. Every infiltrator model exists, because getting close to a human matters. The HK tank throws that whole premise in the trash and wins anyway, more completely than any T-unit ever managed. The machines that stopped bothering to look like us are the ones actually finishing the war. So the machines won by being nakedly, unmistakably machines. Which raises a strange question. Why did Skynet ever bother building things that tried to look like us in the first place? Especially when its earliest attempts were so laughably bad at it. T-600, a killer whose disguise fools nobody, is still a killer. That's the joke and the horror of the T-600 at the same time. By the mid-war years, Skynet had already proven it could win with pure hardware. No subtlety required. Hunter-killers owned the sky, sweeping entire regions without slowing down. Tanks flattened settlements without needing to trick a single human into looking twice. Machines were already winning the war using nothing but force. So Skynet does something strange, something that almost doesn't fit the pattern. It builds a humanoid soldier, wraps it in what's supposed to pass for human skin, and sends it out to blend in. Except it doesn't blend in, not even a little. It looks like a mannequin that got into a gunfight and lost. Resistance fighters in the field call it exactly what it is. Rubber skin. Not flesh. Not convincing. Just a stiff, waxy shell stretched over a metal skeleton. The kind of thing that reads as wrong from 30 feet away. And every fighter who survives one encounter learns to clock the fakes on sight within seconds. That's not a rumor floating around campfires. That's identification training built entirely around Skynet's failure to make a face that holds up under a stare. And these things aren't small either. Bulkier than the T-800s that come later, often hauling heavy machine guns built for sustained combat, the T-600 works 2 jobs at once: infantry grunt and walking terror weapon, built to break morale in human settlements as much as break bodies. Somewhere behind every one of those triggers is a family that used to recognize a neighbor's face and now has to recognize a threat instead. Canon files it alongside the T-700 and the Moto Terminators as an early model. First-wave hardware rushed into a war that was already being won by machines that never bothered pretending to be people. Which raises the obvious question. If the brute force approach was already working, why detour into disguise at all? Nothing in the film spells out Skynet's internal logic, but the pattern writes itself. Humans learn to spot the rubber almost instantly. Skynet responds not by giving up the disguise, but by refining it, chasing flesh that doesn't peel, eyes that don't glint wrong in headlights. The failure doesn't kill the project, it fuels it. A killer wearing bad rubber skin at least tried to blend in. But Skynet's early war arsenal also included hunters that dropped the pretense of hiding and instead weaponized something humans would never think to fear until it was already on top of them: the Moto Terminator. Skynet finally builds a disguise that works. It just isn't wearing a human face. The T-600 gave itself away in a rubber mask and a bad wig. The Moto Terminator doesn't bother with skin at all. and that's exactly why it works. Strip the human shape out of the equation, and the imitation instinct stops failing completely. On the surface, it's just a motorcycle. Lean, fast, aggressive lines, the kind of machine you'd expect to see leaned hard into a canyon road at sunset. Underneath, it's a fully autonomous Skynet hunter unit, self-balancing on gyroscopes, armed, and built for exactly one job: catching things that run and don't stop running. The specs are simple because Skynet didn't need to overthink this one. No plating thick enough to stop a tank round, no slow lumbering chassis like the HK tanks rolling through the wreckage of old cities. Just speed, agility, and a rider silhouette that reads as completely normal right up until it isn't. In Terminator Salvation, these things drop out of a transport and go straight into the chase, running down John Connor's group across open ground and broken streets with the kind of relentless pursuit a walking HK could never hope to manage. Canon files these next to the T600 and T700 under early models, not late war specialists, not some evolved answer to years of hard-won resistance tactics. Early, which means Skynet had this idea for hunting humans through open terrain almost immediately, and just kept refining who got to ride the thing. Fans are split on whether that's brilliant design or just an excuse for a Mad Max chase scene. The tracked platform crowd points out that a hover unit or a tank does the same job without exposing a machine to getting knocked clean off its wheels. The moto crowd doesn't care about any of that, they just want to watch it happen again. But look at what the design actually admits out loud. Skynet couldn't fake a father, a soldier, a neighbor. It could fake a motorcycle. The compulsion to blend in never went away after the T600 embarrassed itself in that first section. It just migrated, off the human body and onto the things humans use to survive. A person trying to outrun Judgment Day on two wheels doesn't get to trust the two wheels riding next to them anymore. These early hunters still needed a factory to be born from raw parts. But Salvation hit a machine that skipped the assembly line entirely, one whose purpose wasn't to kill humans quickly at all, but to carry them off alive for something far worse. The Harvester. Every machine in this war so far has one job: make sure you stop breathing. Then Skynet builds something 3 stories tall whose entire purpose is making sure you don't. That should sound like mercy. It is not. The Harvester shows up in Terminator Salvation as a towering bipedal unit with crane arms built for one specific task: grabbing people alive and loading them into transport carriers like cargo. Not corpses, cargo. It rolls into a survivor settlement and works the crowd like a machine doing inventory, snatching bodies off the ground and dropping them into containers built to hold something that still moves, still screams, still needs air. It even pops open its own hull mid-fight to release Moto Terminators, which means the thing hunting you on wheels and the thing standing over the settlement stacking people into crates are the same operation, running at 2 different speeds. Canon keeps the Harvester separate from the T-units entirely. This isn't a hunter-killer with a new coat of paint, it's logistics. Resource acquisition, the unglamorous side of a machine war that nobody puts on a recruitment poster. Because we process the living doesn't fit on one, and that's the detail that should bother you more than any endoskeleton ever did. A machine built to kill efficiently is at least honest about what it wants. A machine built to keep you alive, moving, cataloged, and shipped somewhere is running a program with a goal nobody in that settlement gets to know. Somewhere in Skynet's chain of command, a father, a daughter, a neighbor stops being a threat to eliminate and becomes a unit to fill a quota. Nothing in the film says what waits at the end of that shipment. That gap isn't a plot hole, it's the actual horror. Whatever those cages were feeding, it needed bodies. And the machines doing the killing between raids weren't wearing skin or rubber or anything at all, just a bare frame built years before anyone thought to dress a machine up as one of us. T-700. You've seen this endoskeleton 100 times and called it the wrong name. That chrome skull, those piston fingers, the walk that made an entire generation flinch. Most of those shots are not the T-800, they are the T-700, and Skynet finished this design years before it ever touched skin. The T-700 shows up in Terminator Salvation, prowling the factory floors in 2018, doing the one job Skynet actually needed done. No disguise, no hesitation, just a bare metal killer built to clear a room. It sits in the same early bracket as the rubber-faced T600 and the Moto Terminators, all fielded in that same brutal stretch of the late 2010s into the early 2020s. But where the T600 wrapped itself in fake skin and fooled nobody, the T700 did not bother pretending. Look at the frame, the proportions, the joint structure, the skull shape. It is almost identical to the T800 chassis that would later hunt Sarah Connor through a nightclub. Almost. What is missing is the tissue integration, the layer of engineering that turns a killing machine into a convincing human being. That gap is the whole story. The chassis worked, it walked, it aimed, it killed, and it did all of that with zero organic covering, which means the hardware problem was already solved. That is where this stops looking like a stepping stone and starts looking like a confession. Nothing in Salvation says it outright, but follow the pattern. Skynet built a perfect combat skeleton first, and only afterward went looking for a way to hide it inside a person. A father who gets folded into that same disguise later in the war is not getting a weapon grafted onto him. He is getting cosmetic work done on a machine that already killed just fine without him. Fans still mix these units up on site, arguing frame by frame over which factory shot is a T-700 and which is an early T-800 because the silhouette barely changed. That confusion is the tell. The skeleton was already the finished weapon, so the skeleton was done. The skin came later, and the franchise moved on. But one film insisted the finished design got quietly improved anyway, and the only proof is a scene about a battery T-850. The most famous killing machine in movie history got a quiet upgrade, and almost nobody agrees on what it actually changed. Fans have been fighting about this one for over 20 years. Is the T-850 a real spec change or just a marketing label slapped on the same old chassis to justify a sequel? The official line says T-850. Same face, new number, upgraded fuel cells, tougher build. Improved power systems mean it can operate longer and take more punishment before it goes down. In T3, this unit protects John and Kate instead of hunting them, running mission knowledge about the future and about Judgment Day that no earlier protector carried. It knows the war is coming. It knows it can't be stopped, only delayed. That's not just muscle, that's Skynet, or the Resistance, handing a machine a deeper file than it ever handed the original. The evidence for a real hardware jump is mostly circumstantial. A scene here, a durability, feet there, nothing that gets dissected on screen the way the endoskeleton does in the first two films. So the fight stays alive. Some call it a genuine upgrade. Others call it the same T-800 with a new badge, because Arnold sells tickets and continuity doesn't. But the detail that actually matters isn't the fuel cells, it's the skin. Guides are clear that Model 101 is a face, not a machine. It's a covering that different chassis under different designations can wear. The T-850 proves what the endoskeleton generation before it only implied. That recognizable, sympathetic, grieving father-shaped exterior isn't welded to anything underneath it. It's interchangeable. A father gets turned into a weapon aimed at his own family, and the machine wearing his outline afterward might not even be the same hardware that did it, which makes the whole imitation project look less like engineering and more like a habit Skynet can't put down. It keeps building the mask, even when the mask isn't required to win. If the face is just a mask number, the obvious next move isn't sending it in for 2 hours and one target. It's giving that mask years, a job, an address, people who think they know exactly who's been living next door in T-888. A T-800 gets an afternoon to become a person. A T-888 gets a decade, and that changes everything about what the mask is capable of doing. The Sarah Connor Chronicles handed Skynet a different clock, and the machine finally had time to do the job right. These units are built the same way as their film cousins, metal endoskeleton wrapped in living tissue, but the show gives them their own designation and their own catalog, separate from the movies entirely. That is not just a rebrand for the sake of a rebrand. It reflects a Skynet that branched off from the main timeline after T2, growing its infiltrators inside a different history with different pressures. And the results are worse. Cromartie is the proof. He does not just wear a face for one job and discard it. He rebuilds an entire body after catastrophic damage, reconstructs a cover identity, and spends years inside a school system stalking John Connor with the patience of someone who has nowhere else to be. Because he doesn't. That is the whole design. A T-800 has a target and a deadline. A T-888 has a life, complete with a job, a routine, and neighbors who wave at it in the morning. That is the part that should terrify you more than the endoskeleton ever could. The mask everyone treated as trivial with the T-850 stops being a costume when you give it 10 years to calcify into an identity. Nobody around a T-888 can ever fully verify who they are talking to. Not for a scene, not for a semester, not ever. Somewhere in that show, a real father, a real coworker, a real face that people trusted gets quietly written out and replaced by something wearing the memory of them. That is the cost nobody counts. The Resistance does not just lose battles to these things. It loses the ability to trust its own reflection of the people it loves. Fans still argue about whether Skynet even needed a new model number for this, since the timeline was already declared separate from the films. Maybe not, but the number was never the point. The point is what happens when infiltration stops being a mission and starts being a lifestyle. A machine can steal a face, a name, and a decade, but there's a version of this that skips the theft entirely, where nobody has to be replaced because the person is still standing there, still talking, and already gone. T $3,000. Skynet finally figures out how to beat John Connor, and the answer is to stop hunting him and just become him instead. That is not a metaphor. In Genesis, John gets infected by Skynet nanotech and turns into the exact thing he has spent his entire life fighting. The T-888 needed years to steal a stranger's face and a stranger's life. This is faster and crueler. It does not replace a person. It rewrites one, and it picks the one person the whole story was supposed to be saving. The tissue itself is unlike anything that came before it. Molecularly bonded nanomachines. Not a metal endoskeleton, not liquid metal mimicking a shape. This stuff self-repairs almost instantly and reshapes on demand, and it does not just cover John's body. It replaces it, cell by cell, until nothing biological is left running the show, except the personality stays. That is the detail that turns this from body horror into something worse. The nanotech preserves enough of John's mind and mannerisms that he can walk right up to his own parents and have them believe him completely. The infiltration isn't a costume anymore. It's a hostage situation happening inside a face everyone trusts. And the source of the infection isn't some rogue lab experiment. It traces back to a physical Skynet body called the T-5000, meaning Skynet itself is the thing doing the infecting in person with its own hands. Fans still argue about whether this was the boldest swing the franchise ever took or the exact moment Genesis stopped making sense. Some love the idea that the war's savior becomes its perfect weapon, the ultimate twist of the knife. Others see a franchise built on cold steel and factory lines suddenly reaching for glowing nanotech magic, and they call it a step too far from what made the original threat feel real in the first place. But strip away the argument and look at what actually happened here. Every model before this one was a machine trying to pass as human, wearing a face like a borrowed coat. This one skips the disguise entirely and just takes the human, and it proves that all that shape-shifting and skin grafting was never the real goal to begin with. It was a workaround, a clumsy substitute for something Skynet wanted the whole time. Rewriting a person is the furthest anything has taken the idea of becoming us. So the last machine in this story does something nobody saw coming. It stops trying to be one of us entirely, and it wins anyway. Rev 9 Skynet spent 40 years protecting a rule that Legion broke on day one, and Legion won because of it. The rule was simple: one machine, one body, one perfect disguise. Every model from the rubber-skinned original to the rewritten human chassis obeyed that limit like scripture, generation after generation, never once questioning it. The Rev 9 looks at the rule and just walks away from it. Legion's answer to infiltration is not a better mask. It is two machines instead of one. The Rev 9 runs an endoskeleton and a mimetic polyalloy sheath as separate cooperating units. The metal chassis can peel away from the liquid form entirely, and both halves keep fighting, keep hunting, keep improvising, independent of each other the entire time. One body gets thrown off a cliff. The other body is still walking towards you. You can defeat half of a Rev 9 and accomplish exactly nothing, because the half you didn't touch was never depending on the half you did. That is not a new coat of paint on the T-1000. That is a rejection of everything the T-1000 stood for. And it gets stranger. Dark Fate confirms Legion was never Skynet at all. This is a timeline where Skynet was erased before it ever launched a single warhead, and machines rose anyway, built by a different system that arrived at its own version of Judgment Day on its own terms. Nobody handed Legion the T-Series blueprints. Legion looked at the entire problem of infiltration from scratch, with zero inherited assumptions, and reached a different answer than 40 years of Skynet hardware ever did. The Rev 9 hunts Donnie Ramos the same way the T-800 once hunted Sarah Connor. One more woman who never asked to become the reason a machine learned to kill better. That thread never breaks. Only the machine chasing it gets smarter. Rev 9 doesn't just impersonate people to get close. It splits, doubles back, and manipulates targets socially while its own liquid half is already 3 rooms ahead, waiting. 2 threats, 1 target, 0 warning, which one is real? Fans still argue about whether Rev 9 is Legion's version of the TX or something genuinely new. The design says new. The TX was one body carrying better weapons, an upgrade on a template that never changed. The Rev 9 is 2 bodies that stopped pretending they needed to be one thing at all, which is a bigger leap than any weapon upgrade Skynet ever bolted on. Every model before this one treated a broken disguise as a failure state. Legion treated it as a feature. The infiltrator that finally outhunted Skynet's whole catalog is the one machine that stopped trying to hold itself together in the first place. T-70. You will not find a single memorable frame of the T-70 anywhere in this franchise, and that absence is the whole point. It shows up in the Genesis Future War footage, one of the earliest combat platforms Skynet ever fielded, and then it basically vanishes from the conversation. No signature kill, no iconic silhouette, no line of dialogue built around it. Just a name on a tech tree, filed chronologically before the T-600 and the T-700, sitting quietly at the bottom of the family tree everyone else gets to be famous in. Canon places it early. Before Skynet had settled on rubber skin, before it had settled on chrome endoskeletons, before it had settled on anything. The T-70 belongs to that first generation of near-humanoid battlefield units, the rough draft era, when Skynet was still asking the most basic question of the entire war: what should a killing machine even look like? Documentation groups it with the other early models that lead up to the infiltrators everyone actually remembers, which tells you its job. Walk forward, shoot. Don't overthink the disguise. That's it. That's the whole file, and that thinness is exactly why it matters. Every terrifying idea this franchise ever had about machines wearing human faces, forging human memories, learning to cry on command, started right here, with a unit that didn't bother trying. The T-70 fought in a body that never pretended to be anyone's father, anyone's neighbor, anyone's way back into a family that still loved them. It just fought, which means the machine war didn't build up to disguise. It built away from simplicity, spent 4 decades chasing a better lie, and ended with Legion throwing the whole project out the window and choosing to just be 2 robots instead of 1 convincing human. Skynet's first units already had the answer sitting in their hands. Walk in, don't pretend, get the job done. Somewhere between the T-70 and the T-1000, Skynet decided that wasn't enough anymore, and every model after that paid the price in stolen faces, stolen voices, fathers turned into weapons pointed at their own kids. Legion didn't build a better killer than Skynet ever did. It built the first machine that stopped trying to be human and simply chose to be 2 of itself instead. That's the reveal Skynet spent 40 years of models refusing to accept. The perfect infiltrator was never the goal. Surrendering the disguise was. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.